Welcome to Al Bernstein Unplugged on boxing. In a 40-year Hall of Fame career, Al has chronicled some of the greatest moments in boxing history.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Here's Al Bernstein Unplugged.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. Delighted that you could join us for what I think is going to be a very intriguing show, to be sure. We have an interview with my friend and Hall of Fame ring announcer, Michael Buffer. We're going to be talking to him about reminiscing about the great times that he and I had on the Top Ranked Boxing Series on ESPN, plus some of the great moments that he's had announcing, doing the ring announcing for major fights, many of the major fights in the last 30 years. And my affiliation with Michael goes way back, and it's going to be fun visiting with him. Also on this show, we are going to take a raft of your questions because you've been sending me questions on Twitter, and they are great questions. They're all interesting and fascinating, and we're trying to get to as many as we can, so we're going to talk about those as well. And to help me do all that, my good friend and co-host, Trip Mitchell. Trip, how you doing?
I am doing wonderfully now that boxing is back. It is just a great feeling. And I really loved getting a chance to see Michael Buffer again because he is truly one of the most unique characters in the history of boxing.
Yeah, Michael's interesting, because in the interview, as fans will get to see, he kind of talks about the idea of, at the beginning especially, trying to shape this what he thought a ring announcer could be, because ring announcing has changed over the years, and he's one of the people that changed it significantly in the last 30 years. He and Jimmy Lennon Jr., and of course Jimmy Lennon's dad, Jimmy Lennon Sr., was fantastic. But the art of it has changed, and the way we perceive ring announcers has changed. So, it's kind of intriguing to hear him talk about that.
And just on the outside, listening to you guys talk, he was upset with you that you stopped the interview after 20 some odd minutes. He was throwing up new topics.
Yeah, Michael, he sent me an email afterwards. He said, I was just having such a good time. I said, yeah, no, because he wanted to continue, which we did for a little while longer. And he was having fun, as was I. But yeah, Michael enjoyed it, and it was fun to reminisce. So people are going to get to hear that in a little bit. And before they do that, though, we're going to answer a bunch of their questions. So what do you say? Let's get to it.
Okay, Andrew Haywood writes, do you think that the Billy Collins Jr. Luis Resto fight was the worst case of wrongdoing in boxing in all your time having been involved?
Absolutely. This was a fight in 1983 in which Luis Resto fought, and Billy Collins fought at the Garden. And Billy Collins was an up-and-coming fighter, Resto a veteran but a very good fighter. And Panama Lewis was in the corner of Luis Resto, and there was tampering done to the wrappings of Luis Resto, and it ended up causing very, very severe injury to Billy Collins. And it was tragic because that sent Billy Collins into such a spiral that he ended up dying, not that long after that. And it was a very, very sad situation. And I think one of the worst ever in boxing. Reprehensible, doesn't even cover it. It led to the banning of Panama Lewis for a long, long time. He has on occasion, I think, gotten back to work in corners. As far as I'm concerned, he never should have. The ban should have been lifetime, and for the most part it was. But it was just a tragic occurrence. And I agree with the writer of the question. Probably one of the worst, if not the worst, that I've seen in my time as a boxing announcer.
So Al, for our viewers who have never been backstage or behind, the gloves are very important, and members of the commission watch all that. Can you just give us a quick thumbnail of how that goes?
They do, and it was kind of elaborate the way he managed to hide what he was doing. But they have to sign the gloves, and they have to sign the wrappings. And so for the most part, these kind of things don't happen. There was the famous case of a fight in which Antonio Margarito allegedly had that happen when he fought Miguel Cotto, and his wrappings weren't right, and some believe that created a problem. Let me amend what Resto's corner did was take padding out of the gloves. I said the wrappings. What I meant to say was the gloves. They somehow found a way to take padding out of the gloves. And sometimes those things slip through the cracks. And it's, it doesn't happen that often, but this is a sport where the difference between being safe and unsafe is very thin.
Yeah, and real quick, do you have a preference on weight of gloves? Do you have something that you think is good?
Well, they have the weight, each, the weights of the ounces of the gloves moves up as you move up in weight class. So, as you get higher, the ounces go up a little bit because men are hitting harder. And so I think they have it calibrated pretty well in boxing.
Okay. Our next question is from a would-be actor out there who is working hard, but I think he might get a break here at any moment.
Yeah, John Cusack. Yeah. John Cusack, yes. He might, if he's lucky, he may get himself a movie pretty soon here. No, he is, of course, a very talented, brilliant actor, and somebody who he and I tweet back and forth all the time. He's a big Cubs fan, which of course gives me a great kinship with them, and he's a big boxing fan. And he asked us a question, did he not?
Okay. Here's a serious one that seems a little bit like a joke. Is there ever been a record anywhere of the great Ali ever throwing a body punch?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. And John had to say, it seems like a joke, but it's a serious question. Okay, I scoured, I couldn't watch every Muhammad Ali fight between the time we got that question and when we were doing this show, but I looked at a whole bunch of them, even ones that people had suggested he might have thrown a body shot. The closest I could come was times when he would throw his jab out there and use it to the chest, to use it as a rangefinder to get the right hand into the head. He literally, one of the principal punches you use as a body punch is the left hook. And Ali had a good left hook to the head. It wasn't his primary punch, but he could throw it, and he threw it with power and effectively. And almost everybody occasionally will throw a left hook to the body if you have a good left hook. I mean, by accident, you're going to do that. I looked at a lot of video of Muhammad Ali. I could not find one body punch where he really was targeting the body. So it's amazing. It may exist in some fight somewhere, but I think John is onto something here. And of course, we know Ali's not a body puncher. It's not something he did. But just finding one or two is really hard. And when you think about that, it's fascinating. So one of the things that is taught to boxers that they do all the time, some people, like the gentleman I'm doing a book with right now, Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, who was mentored by Ali and was good friends with Ali. Body punching was central to his career. And yet here's Ali, who, not doing something that, 90% of all boxers are going to do. And yet, obviously, it didn't, impact him negatively or affect his career in any way. So it's pretty crazy.
Is Tyson one of those guys who used the body to set everything up? Is he one of the best
Tyson
examples?
Was a good body puncher. He had a couple of interesting combinations. He had this one where he'd throw a right hand to the body and then come with a right hook, a right uppercut to the head, which was a great, and he did that with his left hand as well. And that was a very effective combination for him. So he did like to go to the body for sure.
Okay. And another guy was a great body guy. Our next question, MJ Moulton writes, I had great seats to see Roy Jones Jr. in his prime. Before the bell to start, it was an electric atmosphere and my heart was racing. For someone who has seen it all, when was the last time that level of excitement at a boxing match happened for you? Great question.
That was a very good question and well put by him. And I think what he's getting at is we're always excited before a boxing match. We're always interested, and when you're there live, you feel the energy. But sometimes it rises to another level for people. And for me, in recent times, and both of these times I was actually working the fight as opposed to just being an observer. I can remember when a combination of the anticipation of the fight, the crowd itself, and everything surrounding the fight made me feel that anticipation just before the bell. The first one was a few years ago, of recent vintage, of course. First one was a couple years ago when Anthony Joshua fought Vladimir Klitschko, and we televised it on Showtime. And there were 90,000 people at Wembley Stadium. And that energy, plus the fact that this was a seminal moment in Anthony Joshua's career, and they produced one of the more memorable heavyweight fights of the last 15 years. And I remember just before that bell feeling the palpable excitement of the moment. Another one involves yet contemporaries of Anthony Joshua, and that was more recently when I did the first Deontay Wilder Tyson Fury fight, and we had a full crowd there on hand for that one in Los Angeles, and it was so the atmosphere just before that fight was really, really exciting, and we had a lot of anticipation about what was going to happen between those two heavyweights, and they produced a fight that created enormous drama with that, the two knockdowns by Wilder, the great boxing by Fury, and Wilder, or Fury getting up from the second knockdown like Lazarus or rising from the dead. Both of those fights, I remember having that kind of feeling that MJ is describing there, that you just couldn't wait for this to happen.
Well, it was interesting. Showtime last Friday night at 9 o'clock, I came upstairs and my wife had the Klitschko fight on, and she watched every minute of it.
Wow.
And it was amazing. And then they had an aerial shot, and it was tight on the ring, and it pulls back, and you're just amazed by how many people. That we've talked in the past about fights over 90,000. That has to be the most amazing experience.
It was extraordinary. That's probably the biggest crowd that I've ever been to a boxing match with. And it was just extraordinary. The funny thing is, I remember I had to find a place. My wife's nephew was getting married, and she was at the wedding in Cincinnati, and I wanted to call them to just say hello. And I had to go find some place within the bowels of this outdoor kind of arena or stadium, to find a place quiet enough to call them. And I ended up in this obscure bathroom far, far, far. I don't even know where I was. I could have been practically out of the building, where I could finally talk to them because it was so loud, and it was so, and this was way before the main event, but the crowd was so alive with excitement.
That's fantastic. How many autographs did you sign? 87,000?
There may have been a couple people there that were not desperate to get my autograph, but it was, there are a lot of people in England that I've had the opportunity to touch by working fights over there. I was privileged to do the fights on Channel 5, which is an over-the-air network there. And that was really fun because I was able to, even though Brits and people in the UK have seen other shows I've done, this was my chance to really broadcast to them, and with a British broadcasting company. So that was a lot of fun.
Well, great. And they don't subtitle you over in the UK, do they?
No, I had to, like there's a phrase, I had to make sure that I didn't make it baseball references, It's funny how many things are in our lexicon that we realize if you're in another country and you're catering to that audience, it means nothing. And they have a great phrase over there. Dave Farrar, who was doing the play-by-play with me, and he did a great job. He used the phrase, and a bunch of play-by-play announcers in Great Britain use it. It's called mini crisis. Like if a guy's in trouble, I love that phrase. He said, he's in a mini crisis now. And I loved it. So of course, by the 5th broadcast, I couldn't resist. And I used that phrase. He started laughing. I said, see, look, I'm British. So.
Well, our guest today, I asked Michael Buffer before we got started whether he would ever like to switch places with you, and he said he would love to. It'd be fun for him to be a TV guy for one fight.
He's not. I don't think Michael's ever stepped into even. And Michael knows boxing. You know, he's a real fan, as people will hear in the interview.
Fantastic.
All right, we have one more question, don't we?
We do. Let me get to it here. I was so fascinated.
See, I mesmerized you, didn't I?
I lost track here. Have you ever been approached to by a producer or network to favor one fighter while you're calling it?
I thought that was a fascinating question, and I know people when they watch, you know, they think they have their opinions on whether, and sometimes in life, sportscasters are not objective. So come as a shock to people, I know. But I'm going to answer this question, and some people are probably not going to believe me. I have literally never been asked to favor fighter A over fighter B ever by a network, or more importantly, sometimes when you do pay-per-views, not always, but sometimes when you do pay-per-views, you are hired by a promoter. They're the ones that hire you, they pay you, they're responsible for you doing it. And it is easy under those circumstances, I would think, or not easy, but potentially possible, that somebody announcing could feel some sense of fealty to a fighter that promoter may be pushing or has as in their stable. I've never felt that, never felt that it was part of my role to do that, and was never asked by a promoter to do it, which that would be the one instance where you would think they might give you a strong hint or suggest something. And my approach to doing fights when I was hired in that instance was exactly the same as it was when I'm hired by a network to do it. And I literally have never been asked to do it. And I'm glad of that, because I would not, and I don't feel that's appropriate, of course. And you know, while I've made mistakes in my broadcasting career, and maybe subconsciously talked about one fighter more than the other, which you can easily do, or given one fighter more credit for doing something than another one, I assure you it was accidental or a mistake on my part, as opposed to something deliberate. And that's the way it's supposed to be. You know, we had a chat in our last episode, chatting with Joe Goosen, where he talked about how I stressed to him so much when he was getting into broadcasting that the most important thing was to be fair to both fighters. You certainly strive for that. And if you fail, and there have been times when I've listened to broadcasts and I realized I failed a little bit in that attempt. I'll give you an example. When Paulie Malignaggi fought Adrian Broner, there was a lot of acrimony going on between them before those fights. And Broner had already, in private meetings, been, let's say, less than cheerful to me, okay? So there was that going on. So I had my compatriot fighting him. I had him not being as pleasant as would be hoped for to me in a private meeting, for no reason at all, I should point out. And here I was announcing this fight, and I will tell you what I subconsciously did. I subconsciously bent over backwards to make sure I was fair to Adrian Broner. And in doing so, it's one of the fights I can honestly say this happened. I did a disservice to Paulie Malignaggi. I wouldn't say I'm not saying I was blatantly showed blatant favoritism to Broner, but I definitely think that I didn't call that fight as well as I might have with the commentary, and I don't think I gave Paulie the right credit for certain things he did. It just because I was so busy bending over backwards to make sure I was fair, and I admit that was, and I apologized to Paulie. I told him, I said, I don't know. I mean, he was very gracious about it. He did hit me with the right hand, but I deserved that. No, he didn't do that.
Well, Al, one case where I just watched this morning where with Showtime, Floyd Mayweather was a Showtime fighter going up against Pacquiao, and I watched that, and you were very right down the middle, even though it's in your economic best interest and Showtime for Mayweather to win.
Yeah, that to me is is the example of what you just never should do that as a broadcaster. Your mission is to call a fight, and I've approached every fight, whether it's a 6-rounder that is way deep on the undercard to Pacquiao Mayweather. I just think it's important to approach them exactly the same way. And honestly, I know people will probably say, oh, you're gilding the lily by saying this. To me, there is no A and B side. It doesn't exist when I'm preparing to do a fight. I'm making my notes, and here's a piece of paper. On this piece of paper over here, I've got, on this one, I've got the notes with the one guy. On this one, I got the notes with the other guy. I want to make sure I have a lot of notes over here and a lot of notes over there, and that those notes, I'm going to look at them equally during the fight. Yes, if one fighter is dominating the action, I'm going to be talking about that fact, but I want to look at those equally. And I don't care how famous one fighter is and how, unknown the other one might be. I'm going to take that approach. And that's, I think, the way to do it. So please keep sending us your questions on Twitter. I enjoy answering them, and I enjoy you guys sending them, and I hope you find it interesting and provocative from time to time. These were great questions.
And hopefully John Cusack can keep marching forward, and maybe, Al, he can get into your movie.
Yeah. Yeah, right. That's right. I think I can sneak him into a part somewhere. Yeah, John, thanks to John for sending that question into us, as well as everybody else that did it. We have been promising you an interview with Michael Buffer, and now we will deliver. Michael, of course, a Hall of Fame ring announcer who started in the business back around 1981 when I was doing the Top Ranked Boxing Series, though he will point out in the interview that he did have one assignment prior to that, which he tells a colorful story about. And so here is our chat with Michael Buffer. So joining me now, my good friend for many, many years, and of course an iconic figure in the sport of boxing, Mr. Michael Buffer. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Al. Really good to be together with you once again.
I know we don't get to see each other that much because we're traveling in different boxing circles, and only occasionally when we are at some kind of event or something specific do we get to say hi. Unlike the old days when you were starting your career and I was just in the embryonic stages of mine, we literally saw each other every week about 48 weeks out of the year, didn't we?
Almost every week. It was amazing. And it wasn't just Vegas and Atlantic City. It was French Lick, Indiana, yeah. Wheeling, West Virginia was one of my favorites. The blackout, you remember that? Yeah,
that's right. The blackout and Wheeling, the lights went out.
And in the dark, I was telling jokes because my mic was still hot.
This, of course, was the Top Ranked Boxing Series on ESPN, which Michael joined not that long after we started. I got in there about maybe 8 or 9 months before, and then Michael came on the scene. And you're right; those shows, we would not only go to the Vegas and Atlantic City and other places, but we were everywhere.
Yeah, it was great. Kentucky, Indiana, Iowa, the Quad Cities. And
we hit almost every state, I think, in the union, just about during the course of that.
We didn't hit Alaska or Hawaii, but we
missed those.
And remember the cow pasture fights in Carson City?
Gardnerville, Nevada. They called it the Cow Patty Festival for the obvious reasons. It was in a pasture, and that was one of them where one time we did an open where I actually brought my horse up there to ride, and we started the open with Barry sitting on a fence, and I rode away, and then it was hysterical.
Oh,
and
crazy.
you of course, in that time for your career, that was a beginning point for you. It was a pretty dramatic beginning point, wasn't it? Because, sometimes if you're a ring announcer, you toil in places where you're not seen very much, you don't get much visibility, and you work your way to TV. Your beginning was on television pretty much at the beginning, wasn't it?
Yeah, right away. The very first thing I ever did, and I was a disaster, but it was when they had the Tuesday night fights on USA.
Right.
And Alessi Promotions and Brad Jacobs, who's now been with Top Rank for years, was the coordinator. And what I did was, I didn't know how a ring announcer got hired. So I sent resumes to all the hotels in Atlantic City with a headshot. I was modeling back then as this James Bond headshot, the tuxedo. and I sort of like suggested that not even knowing what I was doing, that the image of a hotel casino would be with my look, would be enhanced. And I didn't know I was going to be a disaster in that first show. Anyway, Toby Berlin was the entertainment director at Playboy Hotel Casino. That's where Alessi had most of their fights. She recommended that they just lose this guy. Look at his picture. And, I came in and flop sweat and screwed up a lot of cards. But 6 months later, I got another chance, and it was with a Top Rank show on CBS. And once I got my foot in the door, Aram and Akbar, our buddy Akbar Muhammad,
right,
started using me in every show. And Frank Gelb was the on-site promoter for all the East Coast shows. And it turned into a crazy thing because, then Al, Top Rank Boxing was the #1 show
right
on ESPN.
Yep,
and
sure was.
They didn't have this huge amount of programming, so they would rebroadcast the fight 6, 7, 8 times a week, and so we were on all the time.
Yeah.
and it kind of like really took off. Plus, it was great for the fighters. Donald Curry and I think Mancini, going back even before I started, was there, and just a lot of great fighters got recognition, and they became the Saturday and Sunday afternoon fighters, and then HBO.
Yeah, that was the proving ground we had on that show. Young fighters who were kind of making their way to becoming champions, and it was
a guy named Mike Tyson was.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, did he fought for a title, didn't he? I think he did. Yeah, at some point.
Yeah, he had a pretty good career, I think.
Yeah, he may have fought for a title, and that, of course, for you, vaulted you into doing all the mega matches and all the and everything. What was the point at which you said to yourself, okay, this career is definitely going to be my thing? I'm assuming it was early in that Top Rank portion, but when did you know it was going to take off to the point where it was going to be a serious life-changing thing for you?
Yeah, probably the middle to late 80s, especially in the late 80s when the Tyson fights just became monster fights on HBO and just put the heavyweight division on the map again. And then it really got insane. I mean, it became like a decent payday for me, and it was a full-time job.
Yeah, that was pretty remarkable. And something people may not so much know about you is you have, and working with your brother, Bruce, who helped you a lot with the marketing and all the rest of it. And you guys were very canny about what you did. You worked day and night on creating opportunities and doing things a little bit out of the box to try and figure things out. I always admired that about your whole process, because I admire that kind of entrepreneurial thinking, and you guys were exceptionally good at it.
Yeah, what happened with Bruce was he was like a businessman type of thing, and I started getting these calls to do. Can you do the opening for the Cowboys versus Green Bay in a playoff game? And So, you know, the worst thing in the world is, and you've experienced this, I'm sure, like earlier in your careers, you have to have an agent. You have to have some.
Yeah.
You can't talk to somebody and say, well, I'm worth $5,000 just to walk through the door.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, who's this guy think he is? You know, you have to have somebody say, well, he gets 20 grand and work it down to that $5,000, you know? So,
yes, right.
So I needed somebody to start taking all these phone calls. And so I approached him with the idea, and he had some ideas, and the trademark was I finally had the right representation. I'm sure my wife will get that to get it done. So you going to get that, honey?
That's an important phone call. Who knows who could be calling?
Yeah.
We could be viewing a deal right now.
And so it just started working out well, and literally just became such a full-time job. As you know, the first 3-4 years of doing it, it was part-time, even though I was doing like maybe 20-25 shows in the East. And then Top Rank approached Aram and said, or pardon me, ESPN approached Top Rank and said, can you start using Buffer for all the shows,
right,
you know, in LA and Las Vegas and that sort of thing. Then it really took off. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, you know, once the big fight started, and of course you became a hallmark at it. I know that you're a true boxing fan, and I always got the sense that while of course associated with all this, there's many rewards, and there's the glamour of the event, and we all God knows we all knew how to have fun on the boxing circuit. Sometimes maybe too much, but the fact is, the thing that drove us all, and I think drives you as well, is you are a true boxing fan. You appreciate the sport and you appreciate the boxers.
Yeah, I big sports fan, period. But I just loved I love the sport, and I'm really big on enjoying the history of the sport. You know, because I was a fan. You know, at my age, I was a fan. I actually saw Sugar Ray Robinson in the last stages of his career live on a little black.
Really, I didn't know that. We never discussed that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. I was very upset when you know, the fights with Fulmer and.
Oh, I hated that draw. Wasn't that the worst thing ever?
I was in junior high school, and man, that just killed me. I can remember that just, you know, and I remember like, what kind of fighting is this? You know, for Fulmer, used to do that. It was very effective. He was a good fighter. He was a great Hall of Fame fighter. And, you know, one of the great things about being a fan is you have guys you love, and then all their opponents you hate.
Right.
And you hate them. I mean, you hate them. They're guys, right? And then through the years, such a blessing to get to meet these guys. And you know, at the Hall of Fame, Carmen Basilio and his wife, and Dean Fulmer, and they were at charity events. And I love these guys. They're sweet guys. As a big Ali fan, I hated George. Now George and I keep in touch every week. You know, I mean, he's just the best guy ever. And it's just crazy how that happens and evolves.
It's interesting.
I'm still a fan, and I still have favorites, but I get a tear in my eye when I see the opponent lose to my favorite guy, because I love them both, you know, and that kind of that association with boxing. And I think a lot of people don't know how really, I don't know if affectionate is the right word, but there's a great deal of respect among fighters for each other.
Yeah,
they can throw wolf tickets and they can say things before fights, and you think they hate each other, but there's always that moment where they go over and put their arms around somebody they just knocked out, or you know, years later, Holyfield and Bo can sit down in the same room and laugh with each other, you know, and it's just crazy. But there is a lot of camaraderie there among the fighters that I love. And but getting back to I'm a big boxing fan. Always loved the sport. And you know, this downtime that I have right now, I've just been all over YouTube looking at some of the oldies again, and it's great to be able to see that stuff that before you had to buy an 8mm silent film and look at it, which I did as a kid. I used to, like, you know, look at Floyd Patterson and different fights, and no audio. And now as you get to see all this great stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And this time did give all of us a chance to revisit history and look back at great moments and all the rest of it. Now, many years ago, you did a favor for me, and you'll probably remember this because it was so much fun. Those fight weekends were so much fun at Caesar's Palace and all that. And I will never forget, you did me a favor. The first time I did my music show at Caesar's Palace, you were nice enough to come, and people don't know this about you. You're a very talented man. You're a very good impressionist. And you came and announced me and did 3 or 4 minutes of very fun impressions and to the people, and people got a chance to see a side of you that they didn't know existed.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
We had a good time back then. We always had something crazy going on, didn't we?
Oh, it was crazy. That was like in a lounge in Caesars.
That was the Leonard Hagler fight.
Yeah. Oh
yeah,
my God.
And those weekends, that it's hard to describe, people, isn't it? What the atmosphere was like back in that time at Caesars and in Las Vegas. It was amazing. You turn here and there. I remember that show. It's funny, all these celebrities there and everything. And I remember all that time around all those fights. It was just such an amazing electric atmosphere at those fights.
It really was. There's still these great atmosphere for these big fights and everything, but there was something special about that thing at Caesars, and everybody had to arrive at the main door, limo after limo. Yes. And one of the greatest lines, I think it was Akbar that might have said it, was before a Tommy Hearns fight. Might have been, it was a big Hearns fight. Hearns is fighting somebody. It's a big fight, and of course all the characters from Detroit are showing up with fur coats and hats and a girl in each arm and that sort of thing. And I think it was Akbar, and he said, well, it's going to be safe to be in Detroit tonight. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, it was an amazing atmosphere. How has there been any way in which your craft is a very specific craft for ring announcing? One that, by the way, people think, because it's kind of shorter in duration than other things, they think that there's not a huge amount of skill in doing it, but there is a massive amount of skill in doing it. And the people that do it extraordinarily well, like you and my good friend Jimmy Lennon Jr., you've honed it to a craft. Have you changed anything about the way you do it or approach it over the years?
Always, all the time. I really do. I'm my own worst critic, and I'll look at the older fights and just cringe.
Yeah, I do that too.
Yeah, can't stand myself. And even today, I'll still try to look for something that a little improvement, a little less of this, a little more of that, just little things. Maybe for a while there, I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? What's with all the chatter and talking and trying to like add this and that and trim things back. And one thing that I think it drove production crazy too, as well as the announcer. I don't know if you remember, but it used to be we had to introduce the entire commission, right? And you'd have like, and I think it more or less started in New Jersey, where the Honorable Jersey Joe Walcott Commissioner, and then all the board members and the commissioners and chairman, executive director, right. 4 doctors, a timekeeper, alternate timekeeper. I mean, I actually remember 19 and 20 introductions before the fighters.
Wow, I mean, that's great.
And so Ross Greenberg was executive producer with HBO, and we were doing a big show in Vegas, and I forget what it was. And I said, listen, Ross, I'm going to just introduce the chairman and the executive director, and I'm not going to introduce that 4-member board members and this and that. And we're just killing the crowd. We're killing the audience. And I said, but when they approach me on it, which I know they will, I'm going to say that I came from New York, and HBO. He's like, yeah, okay. And man, sure enough, I literally was in the men's room, and the chairman of the commission came in and said, "I've got a lot of mad guys out there that weren't introduced." I'm like, "Oh," I'm like, "Oh." Didn't you talk to New York? Didn't HBO tell you? They said they would, and I passed it. And of course, they could never call up and say like, "You didn't introduce us," So it kind of like was that turning point where I could, just keep trying to trim the fat and get to the fighters. They're the stars of the show, and that's it was just crazy. Just all these little things you do, but yeah, I always try to not try to change, but try to be better.
Yeah, make sure everything's the way you want it and tweak it a little bit and stuff. I think a lot of people, in our business or in the public eye, I think it's essential because you can easily fall into bad habits or do something. I actually am surprised sometimes when I talk to sportscasters who say they don't watch their work. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, you should at least pay attention to it because you can easily slip into habits and do things that are not appropriate.
Yeah, the best advice I ever got was after one of the shows we did at the country club. Remember we went to Reseda?
Reseda Country Club, yeah.
Yeah, and I met a guy named Jody Berry who was a big fight fan. Actually, used to box as a fighter out of Kentucky, and now he was like a singer and showbiz guy and kind of retired at the time. And we had a few drinks, and he had the Clark Gable mustache and custom-made jewelry and French cuffs, and like just a great guy, but a showbiz guy. And he said to me, "Buffer, when you say let's get ready to rumble, shut the F up." I'm like, "Jody, what?"
Oh.
He said, "Shut up," because I used to just go 12 rounds. Let's get ready to rumble. 12 rounds of boxing for the heavyweight. I wasn't trying to call attention to myself, but I was trying to set up the introduction to the stars, the fighters. And he said, just shut up. People want to react. It was like the best advice I ever. It really made just a huge difference.
That's fascinating. And look, it came from somebody just that you happened to come across. It wasn't like somebody that you hired to consult with or whatever, just somebody that gave you some advice.
Yeah, and another little one was I used to say, the fighters are ready, whatever, and I'd go, "Ladies and gentlemen," and then I'd hit it with "Let's get ready to rumble." And I thought that was, my wife, Christine, said to me about 10 years ago, she said, "Make that ladies and gentlemen a little bit bigger." And sure enough, she was right. I can look at it now, and instead of, I was trying to be, "Ladies and gentlemen, let's get," she said, "Ladies and gentlemen," like hit it big. I'm like, okay. So there's two really great moments from, you just never know the source, and you look at it and say, yeah, they were right.
What a joy to visit with you. It's fun to get to discuss in long form some things that, and we barely scratched the surface. Sometime I'll bug you again to come back and we can relive some more memories.
We'll do one episode out where all we'll talk about is Wheeling, West Virginia, French Lick. I mean, those days were absolutely insane.
Well, the one thing we could count on during those visits, because as you pointed out, we went to places where it's not like they had boxing every week.
The Mouseketeers.
Which one?
The Mouseketeers.
The Mouseketeers,
Bruce
that was Bruce the Mouse Strauss, famous opponent who had all these guys that drove around the United States in cars as opponents, which was crazy. Yep. Only in boxing could that happen. And all these places have boxing all the time, so things happen.
The welterweight, Buck.
Buck.
200
Smith.
wins. 200 wins, or 190 or something. I mean, incredible.
He wasn't a bad fighter, Buck Smith.
He was a good fighter. Yeah, it was. Yeah.
That was crazy. There was a lot of nutty things. I saw a video where I was interviewing after a fight. Some guy put it on Twitter. And we were talking about the fact that the very day of the fight, he played wiffle ball with us in the day of the fight. He was out there with all of us playing wiffle ball. I'm like, really?
And I remember in Wheeling going down to the dressing room to get I made sure I had to get everything right for ESPN. And we would have fights that weren't on the air. So I'm asking these guys, and I had to introduce us, but so I'm like, okay, and you're in the blue corner, and what color trunks are you wearing? And he turns to his other guy and says, what color trunks are you going to wear? You wear the red ones tonight. I'll wear the green ones. They were fighting each other.
Yes. That was below television.
Yeah. I mean,
that's funny. Well, Michael, thank you so much.
Okay, wait, I've got to ask you one thing real quick.
Oh, go ahead.
I think it was you interviewing a guy in the ring, and it was a fight in New England, and there were like some knockdowns, and the referee kept saying, and I believe it was you, and you were saying like, well, what about those knockdowns? And he kept saying, "Them's was slips."
Oh, that was in Providence, Rhode Island. Yeah, it was. There was a fighter, and I don't remember his name right now, but he was the hometown guy, and he got knocked down 4 times. And they were all very legitimate knockdowns. There was like no question. Sal Marciano, who of course you know from the Top Rank series and his fine work in New York, was, he and I were interviewing the guy, and I said, well, wasn't that a knockdown? He said, no, that was a slip. And then we'd show another one, and we'd say, how about that? No, that was a slip. Literally was not copying. And in fact, they wrote a story in the New York Times about it.
Them's was slips.
Those were slips, yes. Tabor was the referee. I just thought of his name.
And the
that was crazy.
Kenny Bogner, was it?
Kenny Bogner, right?
And your interview, he had all the fans in his corner, and they're all screaming and yelling. The fight's over, and he wins. And he's got his and he's nodding while you're talking, and you're setting up this whole thing for him to say. And his fans, and they were all like toothless, crazy people from Camden or something, or Trenton, or where was he from? Boom Boom Bogner.
Yeah, in New Jersey, yeah.
Bang Bang Bogner. And he goes, he's nodding at you, and then you go for his reply, and he says, "I didn't hear a fucking word you said." On the air.
I leaned in and I said, "Okay, I'll say it a little louder for you." Yeah, that was a funny moment, that's for sure. We had some crazy ones, and that was pretty nutty. Oh my God. Well, Michael, thank you so much. This has been a joy, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I'm glad you're already back applying your craft, and we'll have a lot more of it coming up in the future.
All right, you take care. Hi to Connie.
Take care, Michael. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So that was our chat with Michael Buffer. Very enjoyable. As you can see, Michael loves to reminisce about the past. And that story, Trip, about Kenny Bang Bang Bogner, which was that he was told accurately. There was I could not hear, and when Bogner said that, I looked and I said, okay, I'm going to say this a little bit louder, and hopefully you will hear it. But that was so typical of the crazy things that happened on that Top Rank boxing series.
Well, audio issues in a big arena, that stuff happens. But
yeah, people were screaming and yelling, and he couldn't hear. So that was fascinating. Anyway, we're glad that you joined us for this episode. My thanks to Trip, of course, for his fine work, and to Lee, our producer, who helps us put this on. And we will see you on the next episode. Take care, everybody.